Welcome to the Introduction to Program series. Today I'm going to introduce us to what's programming and what we're going to be doing in this class, starting with what's a computer. I think this is good for us to understand before we really start some of the terminology, if you will, before we really start getting into it. And a lot of you might be familiar with this in different versions, different realms. But just to recap, we have, hard drive space or disk space. This is where you save files. We've got these pieces that make our computer perhaps load things faster, a motherboard that links it all together, a power supply, a CPU. All of these things go into either, a desktop that's around your desk or a laptop or even an iPad, right? These are all connected in here. And then we often have some varying amounts of computer accessories which are attached to that computing device. Um, we're not going to go into the depth of here. That's not what this class is about. We talk about computer programming, which doesn't really work with this stuff directly. But this stuff we're just going to call it hardware. We're just going to simplify everything. We're going to call that hardware. That's physical things you can put your hands on. But hardware doesn't work alone. If there's hardware, there's got to be software. And then there's us, right? And we as users tend to interact with software, sometimes through hardware, but most of the work that we're in it, stuff we're interacting with, is the software controlling some sort of hardware. So we're going to be in this class when we do programming is we're going to be working a lot closer with computer software than we are with the hardware. So then the next question is, what is computer software? Well, in software, we often have, if we have this hardware down here, on top of the hardware, the closest that we'll get there is something called an operating system. And now you might be familiar with like a MacBook or a Macintosh. They have something called Mac OS. A lot of us have Windows computers, laptops, or desktops. And then there's even something called Linux, which a lot of developers really like because of the tools it provides. Now, I did include them just to bring it up. Like we know that iPhones and tablets, iPads have something like iOS installed, which is a little bit different than these other guys. And then there's other things as Android devices that have this Android operating system. We're not building these; these already exist. There's not a lot of them. So they kind of do a lot of the work between talking from what we want to do with our software to the hardware. They are software themselves, but we don't touch them so much. So I'm going to take those out as well. What we do interact with are these applications or executables, right? We might open Windows, but once that turns on, we kind of stop talking directly to Windows, right? We run Microsoft Word or we double click Google Chrome or something, right? We these applications, these executables, we go and interact with to do the thing we want to do, to make our screen show a movie, to talk to people somewhere else, to access our email. Whatever it is, these applications and executables don't need to be running on Windows or Linux or Mac. They run on something, but they can be moved around and these are a lot more of what we're going to end up building. So here's us. The way we talk to this stuff is we might, double click on Google Chrome, run it on our Windows machine, and then that goes and messes with the monitor and the processor to actually like, pull files from the internet. But we interact with these applications and executables. So with that in mind, the next question is, what is computer programming? Since this class is Introduction to Programming. Well, we are going to be building these applications or executables, I'll call them, just kind of be generic. Application often has a name that's big. Executables, just like anything small even is an executable. So we get these executables. And you may have heard of this before, but where do executables come from? They come from code. There is some sort of code that was written in some programming language, some computer code, which we might call source code or scripts or computer code, but we're just going to call code. And this gets turned into this executable. Now you might wonder, well, where does the code come from? Well, there's a code editor that edits code. These code editors we might call text editors or integrated development environments. We're just going to call this, IDE. IDE is the shorter form of that, but we're going to call this a code editor for now. We will end up using our own code editor to write a certain style of code that will turn into an executable. And so who's missing from this picture? We are. We call ourselves a dev or a developer or a programmer. There's a bunch of terms for these for us, but we are a dev. We interact with a code editor to write code. Um, Now, I'm sort of alluding to it with this dotted line, but there's a step missing because code doesn't just become an executable. You can't just run code. You have to do something to it to make it turn into an executable. And what is that? That is something called a compiler. This is another thing that we use. And these words are a little weird if you're not used to them. You will get more and more familiar with them. I'll use them a lot. But largely as a dev, we interact with our code editor and our code, and then we have our compiler compile the code to an executable. And it looks something like this, right? We start with nothing. We just say, hey, I want to write a program today. So I open my code editor. And then using my code editor, I write some code. So far, so good. And then once I'm at a good spot, I'm feeling pretty good about this code, I will open my compiler and I will use it to compile the code into an executable. And then I can run the executable. And then if I want to use this more later, or I really like it, it's like I built a app that helps me keep track of my shopping list, or an executable that just keeps, journal writings on my computer. I can send the executable to my friends and then they can just run it. They don't have to have all this extra work. It's just in the process of creating an executable, we go through, writing some code through a code editor and then using a compiler to sort of publish it or give it into a place that we can publish. Um, yeah, and that's programming.